All right, Dani from RedThread Research. I'm so happy to be talking to you again. I always like to get the chance to talk to you whenever I run into you places, and so now I've got you here in my home office, and I can talk to you all I want. So I'm excited to have you here. Thanks for joining me.
Happy to be here.
Awesome. And today we are going to talk about something that I think you and I have probably talked about on our own, together, more than we'd probably care to say over the last few years or so, but the concept of learning and measurement, the idea of how do we know things are working. And I don't know about you, spending the last 15 years or so as an analyst, you see the issues, we talk about the issues, everyone seems to nod their head and agree, yes, these are the issues. And then nothing really seems to ever happen. Do you feel like that too? Do you think, are they moving though in the right direction when we talk about learning measurement?
Oh, I think they're moving, but I think they're
Okay.
moving because the environment is forcing the movement, not necessarily because L&D folks are super proactive.
Well,
So, for example, L&D's world got upended during the pandemic. I wish we still weren't talking about the pandemic, but we are. It got upended during the pandemic, and we started thinking of all the other things. And during the pandemic, we also realized that people learn in different ways, which we've always known, but I think we've sort of embraced that a little bit more. We think about it as learning. Learning basically consists of planning the development, finding the right stuff, consuming the stuff, experimenting with new knowledge and skills, connecting with others for learning, and then performing on the job. And I think learning analytics plays an incredibly important role in all of those. But to this point, we've mostly just been worried about what the LMS can kick out as far as measurement goes. So I think the pandemic helped us move past that. And then the other thing that I think is happening right now is Gen AI and ecosystem thinking is changing the way that data is looked at. So it's no longer an end node. We're not just trying to get to the data to make a logical decision about what to do next. We're actually feeding it into other systems, and it's personalizing learning on an automated personalizing learning and feeding into larger data lakes and all that kind of stuff. So it's moving for sure, but I don't think it's proactive movement. I think it's trying to catch up or keep up with the organization and with our vendors, frankly.
yeah. I mean, clearly the pandemic exposed a lot of the warts within, learning functions, stuff that was always there under the surface, but, became really obvious when everything changed so suddenly. And I think we got my bingo card here. We got pandemic and AI in the first minute of the podcast. So I think
You're
we're on
welcome.
to a record. Good for you. Yeah, it's so true. But you mentioned there the idea of an endpoint, right? And I think that's always to me been the big mistake with measurement. It isn't, okay, what is the specific thing I need to look at, and what's the mechanism for me to measure? It's like, no, you're already going into this thinking, okay, I'm going to do all this stuff, and at the end of it, I'm going to measure it.
Yep.
It's too late, right?
It
I
is too
mean,
late.
the
It is
measurement is
absolutely too late.
measurement's the beginning, and that's why. And I feel like whenever you come back and you hear time and time again, it's well, this is our completion rate. Even though people will talk about what they want to measure, and this, yeah, our business impact. And let me show you, 95% of people finished this course, and
Yeah.
most of them liked it. Because they're not starting with the measurement. They start just heads on, I'm going to build this thing. And when it's all said and done, they stand up, look around, and go, well, what's left? The only thing I can tell you is that people finished it and they
Right.
got a grade maybe. So yeah, this idea that measurement is some sort of endpoint on a linear flow chart of how learning happens is the big mistake. And that's why you can't do any of the stuff that we've talked about that we'll probably talk about today, because you're looking at it like someone's going to come and give you a report card at the end of this thing.
Exactly. That's exactly right. The report card sort of thinking and the way that we've done it up until now leads to exactly that. Dead metrics. I
Yeah.
call them dead. Dead. Can't do anything with them.
Then that's sort of the thing, right? Okay, great. What do I measure? And I think you probably get asked this a lot. I know I always get asked it. Is okay, cool. I get it. Now give me a list of things I should measure, right? What
Yeah.
are the metrics? And it's always tough to answer that without sounding like you don't know the answer, because you say, well, it depends. And as soon as you say it depends, you're like, oh,
Yeah.
that just means you don't know anything. but it really does depend, correct? I mean, what do you think? What's your response? Do you have like a go-to list of, okay, well, at the very least, you should be measuring these universal things, and now let's dig into some of your specific things.
No, I do not. I actually started, yeah, we did a study a couple of years ago, and I actually started compiling a list of all the metrics that I saw. And the metric list got to be about 350 before I stopped and said, this is a stupid activity because, as you mentioned, and please don't shut me down when I say this, but it does depend. Like it depends on what the business actually really cares about, right? So if my business goal is to do this, then I need to measure the things in learning that actually I think are going to lead to that thing. And it's different for every single organization. Why are we developing employees here? Are we developing for in certain skills? Are we developing to retain them? Are we developing to build leaders? What are we building? And then once we understand those KPIs, how do we back it into metrics that actually feed into that final KPI?
Yeah, it's like a symptom of that overall report card illness, right? It's that approach is, okay, great, then there must be this list of things that I can look at. And like you said, even if there was, each one would mean something different for your particular organization anyway. And it's great when you say something like 350 where you got to where you said, okay, this is ridiculous. You're starting to compete with skills inventories. Where people go, what kind of skills do we need? And you're like, well, let's get a list. We need these 1,000 skills. Let's build them.
Exactly.
So I guess that's where we're coming from, and and trying to really drive home that there isn't a silver bullet list. Stop trying to search the internet for one. Not saying that if you've got friends in the industry and you're at an event and somebody's in a similar industry or a similar type of organization, you can share notes. And we find that these are the things that work and these are the things that don't work. I think that's what these events are for, really. That's where you should be spending your time. But again, it all comes back to what is it that you're doing particularly. And I think, all of these things sound hard and they kind of
They are
can be.
hard. Can
So
we talk
that's why they
about
don't
that
get
for just
done.
a second? Yeah, let's talk about
Yeah,
why it's so
please.
hard. Yeah, so I mean that's one of the things that we heard over and over again. So we're actually refreshing this study right now, and we talked to 30 leaders and said, all right, what are you doing here, and why is this so hard now? And they came up with a few really important things that I think we should all pay attention to. The first one is that a lot of times senior leaders don't care about these metrics. Like we invest in learning because we invest in learning. That's what we do. It's the thing to do. We invest in employee development. And so a lot of times I've been talking to L&D leaders and they're like, I care. But since they don't care, I'm measuring things that help me be more efficient and use my money better, not necessarily work toward those KPIs. And to them, I would say it's your responsibility to make them care. Like you are a function in this organization that can have a big impact. So make them care. Like show them some things that are going to change their mind. But that's one of the things we hear. We also hear learning is super complicated. So when you think about talent acquisition, you usually have one talent acquisition system, right? And that's where you get your data. For learning, we did a study a few years ago. Most learning organizations have at least 11 of them. And when we did our learning tech study this year, there were over 450 vendors in this space. And so when you think about like what does learning analytics mean in an organization, like the number one thing is like what are your data sources and how are you making those data sources speak to each other, right? And if you have 11 systems, just to get even an inkling of what people are thinking about learning, it's a really complicated problem. It's super complicated. And so a lot of people will just throw up their hands and be like, well, most of the data lives in this one place, and so we're going to take the data from here, and now we have a report that we can pass out, and that's where we end it. But it is a very complicated problem. There are a lot of moving parts with learning. And then on top of that, like our research also shows that there are 60 ways that people learn inside of organizations, right? So you've got all the systems that enable some of those things, but then you've got all this learning that happens that isn't necessarily attached to the learning systems. And so where are your other metrics that you sort of can bring together? It's a very complicated challenge. And just weeding through that and trying to figure out exactly what we're trying to measure and why is a really big issue. Tell me what you think.
Yeah, I mean, it is, and I think, but it is hard work. Anything that's worth doing is hard. I think I heard that somewhere.
Sure.
But in the again, and it's one of those things. In the long run, it turns out to be more helpful. So in the scenario you're describing, all these different ways learning is happening, some completely under the radar, but hopefully you've got an environment that facilitates and encourages that, because that's what you want. So when you start to apply the old school measurement mentality to it, like, well, I can't measure that. I don't know what's happening, so I'm not going to pay attention to it. But if you were measuring these other outputs, these, whether people are doing things differently, better, faster, stronger, whether business impact is happening, results, then you don't have to worry about measuring the nuts and bolts of how the learning's happening, right? It's like, we've put this in place, and this environment is creating a situation where our outcomes are occurring. Great, let's keep doing that. Or things aren't working, so let's fix things. I think that's the other thing about measurement, is we don't focus enough on bad results. I think that results are results, and this idea of, well, I want to measure things that show me that it works. Well, sometimes it doesn't, right? But I want to go to something you said too, though. You said about how, well, they don't care, right? So I'm not going to bring them. I'm not going to put the effort in to bring them the stuff they don't care, but they want, and I'm just going to do this. But the reason why leadership in some organizations, C-suites, whatever it is, the reason they don't care is they've never been brought something to care about.
That's a good
They've
point.
only ever seen completion rates or things like that, and budgets from learning. And so they've just been conditioned not to care. If you're able to come in and say, okay, yes, in addition to all of these variables within the organization, here's something that we've done. Here's what we saw that happen. I think you'd start to see that they will begin to care, because you're affecting things that matter to them, the things that they are talking about first thing in the morning when they get there,
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And I actually think, in our last large scale survey, and we're doing one right now, so if you want to participate, please let me know. But in our last large scale survey, learning leaders told us that they were participating, about 57 or 58% of learning leaders are participating in those higher conversations, like strategic conversations. And if that's the case, you can't come. Yeah, well, you just got to sit down, like pull up a seat and sit down and like participate, right? And so if we're in those discussions with finance and with these other organizations that are heavily data driven, we can't just come in with our good old L&D gut check and be like, well, I think, based on what we should be doing this. Data is going to become increasingly important to be able to have the credibility we need in organizations to move it. I think the other thing that's happening, David, is learning and skills they're kind of becoming the same conversation, right? So we talk a lot about skills data. You just talked about the taxonomy, the 1,000 skills you need, but learning data actually helps get skills data, which is used by the rest of the organization. And so unless we have our stuff together, I was going to use an expletive right on your podcast, unless we have our stuff together, and we can not only speak to that but make that usable for the rest of the organization, we're falling short of our capabilities, of our I don't know if it's capabilities yet, but our mission.
Yeah, I don't know. It's very hard, and I'm assuming you sometimes feel the same way when you've spent so much time doing this research and digging into this stuff. That how do people not get it? And I don't mean that to be mean or talking down or condescending in any way, but it's just, I understand people have day jobs and you're getting through the grind of every day, but you start to think, okay, but if you're saying, oh, learning and skills will become increasingly connected, well, but okay, what were we doing before? Or oh, we're going to get better at connecting learning to business outcomes. Okay, but why were we doing anything 10 years ago? Why did learning exist if it wasn't connected to these outcomes back then? Why were we doing it? Why? And I hate to put it to why do we exist? But why are we doing what we're doing? We're not simply here to provide onboarding safety training when necessary. There's a reason all of these that the function exists. There's a reason these programs exist. So let's get back to that. What is it? What was the need that generated this? Where did this come from? It just simply can't be to say that, well, we got people to take it and we can check that box and we know that it's done. There has to be some kind of reason, right? I mean, I don't.
Well, yeah, and originally, the rise of the factory classroom kind of came up the same time Taylorism came up, right? So we're worried about efficiency and on the line, and so how do we make sure that we have as much repeatability as possible? Oh, we put people in a classroom and teach them how to do something so it's repeatable. And that's worked, to some extent, it's worked pretty well for the last 100 years. But if you think about your job and my job and pretty much anybody that we're talking to, their jobs are not repeatable. Like it's not something, you don't do the same thing every day. You're not building muscle memory. You're
Right.
actually having to think strategically and those types of things. And so the way that we measured before, which could be butts and seats, because then we could correlate butts and seats with how well a machine worked or how smooth a line ran, that doesn't work anymore because we're training different things and we're requiring people to have different types of skills that aren't that quantifiable.
Yeah, I mean that's obviously as the jobs get messier and more complex, the learning gets more complex. Then, as a result, how do you measure that stuff? And I think that's the big scary thing. Is it's like, whether you want to call them soft skills, which is sort of an outdated term, but these the way we're trying to help people learn how to learn, help people learn how to think. Okay, how do you measure that, right? And again, you're doing those things in pursuit of larger goals.
Right.
But do you think, so for orgs that maybe are like still, that idea of connecting learning to those larger business goals is a big undertaking. It's like kind of far out of reach at the moment. Is the first stop, well, let's try to see if we're actually getting individuals to do things differently, or like that they're actually, exhibiting these skills, these behaviors, these things. I mean, is that a natural progression place to start?
I mean, I think it's all one, right? So individuals roll up to teams, which roll up to organizations. I think it has much more to do with like how we're thinking about the metrics that we're putting together. So if I'm worried about developing a certain skill in my organization, or if I have a hypothesis that a certain skill in my organization is going to drive revenue, then my goal is to get people to develop that skill. And then as an L&D person, I'm no longer looking for causation, which we've been looking at forever. Like the whole ROI is based on this idea of causation. You take this course and this happens. Instead, you're looking at correlation. So the people that took this course, it correlates with an increase in revenue. And I think you can do that with every single KPI. And I like that idea a lot because instead of causation, which is a report card, we did this, they took this course, now they have this. We have correlation, which is a much more fluid thing. These people are doing these types of things or this combination of things, which we can do now because the data and the tech are much better. These combination of things, and because of that, their division or their team are operating at a much higher level, or they're seeing this KPI is moving because of that. It's not a direct causation, but the correlation gives the organization some idea of where to invest, and the L&D team some idea of where they need to tweak in order to make that smoother. Yeah. So I don't know that I see it as a measure the individual and as sort of a stopping point. I see it as you got to measure the individual in order to get to where the business is going.
Yeah, no, for sure, and this idea that you were talking about collecting data and how important it's going to become, and then you did mention AI. So for companies that think that that's in their future, or understand that that's in their future because it most likely is, I mean that's going to be the critical piece. The AI feeds off of data. That's how it knows what it knows. It isn't intelligent unless you feed it something. And so that kind of thing you're discussing, right? That being able to take all of these different variables, put them together and say, this is what's happening. AI is, hopefully, the idea is you're going to be able to predict on that and generate forward from that to say, and this is what now we've realized, this is what the ideal program looks like for this, and these are the kind of outcomes we can expect. I mean, so I think you would agree that it's really about companies really need to get their data strategy solid when it comes to learning. Like, okay, yes, we want to measure these things, but what are the data points that are going to help us do that? Do you think that's sort of a hang up, I think, in a lot of companies? Because you mentioned correlation, causation, that sort of thing. You do research all day long, and you live and breathe this stuff. I've done it for a very long time as well. But do you think that's maybe a gap in learning orgs, that they might not see it that way? So if they can't draw that straight causation line, then it's not worth it? For
sure. We did some research recently on learning skills. We asked We asked 300 leaders what skills they would need in the next couple of years, and data came in second. Leadership came in number one.
Yeah.
Data analytics came in second. So I think we are lacking those skills. Actually was talking to a gentleman, Derek Mitchell. If you don't follow him, you should. If you're interested in this topic, he's kind of brilliant. But I said, it's hard, Derek, like, people don't have these skills. And he's like, well, first you should get them. And secondly, it's not that hard. And I was like, well, what do you mean it's not that hard? It seems hard, like all these systems and all these ways of learning, and you can't. And he's like, yeah, but you just start with one. Just start with one KPI and think through, what you can do to move that, and then figure out the data streams that help you sort of define what's happening there, and then you add another one. And he's like, you just start. You start with whatever you have and then keep going. So I do think it's a skill that a lot of L&D functions lack, but I don't think that should stop anyone from doing it. Because really, like, once you start getting in there and building that culture, I think it should happen pretty fast. Like, if we can stop thinking in terms of like, I need to develop this 150-page report on how my learning function is working, and instead say, I need to think through how I'm moving this KPI, then all of a sudden, all the things change. The way that you develop things, the things that you're paying attention to, the relationships you're building, the comfort you have with data and the ability to use those relationships to get new data streams, like all of those things sort of like build on each other to solve the problem. It's just starting.
Yeah, and data can seem very overwhelming, especially because most orgs are sitting on mountains of it that they don't know what
For
to do
sure.
with. And that seems very overwhelming. And you think, well, I can't make sense of all of this. And it's, like you said, well, don't.
Yeah,
Don't try to make
exactly,
sense of
don't.
all of it. Pick and choose and figure out, it's, and plus, I think technology's come a long way that it's easier for people who are not necessarily a data scientist to ask questions of data and
Yeah.
get answers, reasonable answers back without having all of that background. I think that's helpful as well. It just I've talked to organizations about this. It's like, okay, if you don't have it on the L&D team, you don't have somebody there that's got this sort of head for data. You probably have somebody in your organization that does, and see how you can leverage that. Of course, there's also external help as well for that, but I don't think people are really chomping at the bit to put another line item on their budget. But there's usually somebody within the org that can become a shared service to help think through data, at least get the ball rolling, right? And like you said, you do it once in a targeted way, you start to figure out the universal challenges that will apply to every time you do it, and it's coming,
Yeah.
and you can sort of get better and better and better at it as it goes. One thing I wanted to talk to you about, because it comes up whenever you talk to organizations about measurement, you end up talking about ROI. When you hear ROI, what's your take? What does your brain immediately start to do when someone brings up ROI?
It dies a little bit.
Okay, I was wondering if you were going to say that, but I didn't want to push you in that direction.
Yeah. No, I think ROIs can be useful, and they have their place for sure. But I think a lot of L&D departments stop at the ROI. We also know, anybody who's done any sort of business education knows that ROIs can be tweaked quite a bit, just kind of based on how you're calculating that and what you're adding to that and all that kind of stuff. And so I think number one, you got to be careful with ROIs because they can be tweaked, and so put on your thinking cap and questioning abilities whenever you're faced with one. The second thing is, I see an ROI as a dead metric. Live metrics are things that can help us better or course correct. ROIs can't really do that, because what it does is it basically takes something that we've done and tell me how much money I made or didn't lose because that thing was in place. And once it's done, and you're like, okay, well, the ROI was good. Awesome. On to the next project. You know what I mean? And so they do have their place. Some senior leaders are going to continue to ask for them. But the ridiculous, it's such a strong focus that L&D organizations have on ROI that worries me a little bit, because it keeps us from doing more strategic types of things with our measurement.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I'd say the only sort of glimmer of light in there is, I think a lot of folks use the term ROI to describe the things that we're already talking about right here, right? Like you start to talk about, is learning having an impact on the business? Then that's a return on investment, and essentially it is. But if you're out there and you're in the learning space and you're talking about ROI, realize that your definition of it might be slightly different than somebody you're talking to. And a lot of
Yes.
times, some people like when you say
Yeah.
ROI, there's a literal mathematic equation that visualizes in their head about
Right.
dollars and cents, and others are just saying, "Well, we're doing a good job." So
Yeah.
yeah, and I think you're right. I think we need to, you move away, and I think people have tried to look at, oh, well, it's ROE, return on
Return on
effort or
engagement or
engagement,
effort. Yeah. Yeah. Or
whatever it
ROI
is.
return on, yeah. Like there have been all these sort of like tweaks to it that I've heard from the L&D department. And I think that's dangerous. I really do think that's dangerous. I think the language that we use as an L&D function should be aligned as closely as possible to the rest of the organization. Because if we have our own language that requires extra effort to teach people what we mean, and sometimes we don't have any credibility because we're not using the same language. And so please use the same simple language that the rest of the organization is using and create your own metric if you'd like something like return on effort.
Right. Yeah, because it's there. But I
Yeah,
also think
but
that,
to your point, like ROI is like that's a financial term and it's very well understood. And so if you walk into a room with finance folks and you're using the term ROI and you're using it differently than they would, it can get confusing and really kill credibility.
yeah, and it's born out of other business operations in the past that did fit nice and neatly into those buckets, and so it started to get applied to everything. And there are certain parts of learning that you can quickly do that, but not all of it. But if you get, again, I feel like it's a mentality and a phrase that's been pushed from the other parts of the business, that are trying to jam the square peg of learning into the round hole of finance.
Yeah.
And yeah, so just I hear it enough, and I'm sure you do too. That's why I brought it up, that it inevitably, when you're talking to learning leaders, practitioners, sometimes it gets into the discussion of ROI and like how do we sort of gracefully guide people out of that mentality into the kind of things that we're talking about instead. Do you think we'll ever get away from that, or is it just always going to be ROI?
I don't know. I mean, I'm Burson alum, and I've always had 4 levels of maturity, and I think there will always be a faction of L&D organizations that think in terms of that, but I hope we increasingly move away from it.
Yeah. So we touched on technology a little bit, but I wanted to get your perspective, since obviously you look at the whole technology space that's out there. What are, and I'm not talking brand names, I'm just talking like technologies as a concept. What are some of the things that companies should be thinking about if they want to get better and have the right tools to do this kind of measurement, right? Like it's got to be
Yeah.
something more than an Excel spreadsheet. There's something else that's out there. And also it doesn't necessarily have to be full blown
Yeah.
data lakes and scientists. And so there's got to be help in between, right?
Yeah, I think there is. So the first thing to understand is that the L&D space has been upping their analytics game for the last 4 or 5 years, like tremendously. Like we've seen organizations that you used to be able to print the report. They now have some analytics functionality that is pretty cool. So that's the first thing, is that everybody's going to offer you some sort of analytics. And in fact, when we did our study, it was the #1 growth area for vendors. We went to like 89% of all vendors that we talked to are offering some sort of analytics functionality, which is big. The second thing is, this is going to sound weird and tangential, but it's the way that organizations are hooking together. So we call it interoperability. Like this system works with this system. And the reason that is because, as I mentioned, data is no longer an end node. Like analytics is no longer an end node. We need to take this information and feed it into another system in order to draw those correlations that we were talking about, or to provide more personalized learning or whatever it is. And so the interoperability between two systems is a pretty big deal. And we've seen a huge uptick. I don't know if you've seen this too, David, but a huge uptick in the conversations around partnerships between vendors. So it used to be like, we used to have a good selling partnership, but now it's like a deep integration, and sometimes it's white labeled analytics stuff inside another system. Like all of those types of things are happening, and understanding what is available and who hooks to what and what they offer because they hook to that and who's integrated where and all that kind of stuff is task. We can help you a little bit with some of the stuff that we've written, but it's a task, but it's also really important to understand. So everyone's doing it. Figure out what you actually need. Figure out where the data can come in and out. That's a really big deal. And then figure out who else in your ecosystem also works with that technology so that that data flows seamlessly.
Yeah. I'd like to get your take on this. I think what happens is we hear a lot about integrations, and companies are looking at technologies like, well, does it integrate? Does it integrate? And then again, it's a term that like, okay, do you really mean integration? Because I think your term interoperability, much different. And also it's really about what you're really probably looking for is, can I move data from one to the other and back again? They don't have to necessarily be integrated to do that. There's just the ability to share data. And I think people get hung up on integrations where if you ask a vendor, are you integrated with X? Well, no. Oh, well, then we can't do that. But the fact of the matter is they're interoperable. They share data. And so again, it's about breaking your mindset about how things really work. I think you've described it really well.
No, I think that's a really good point. And, and more than that, like asking the deeper questions about what that means, right? Because some vendors will say, oh yeah, we integrate with so-and-so. And what they actually mean is they can provide a CSV file that can be uploaded into their system. And that technically can be an integration. It's a very labor intensive integration, but it can happen. And so determine the level of interoperability you actually need and ask the questions to get down to, do they actually interoperate?
Yeah. And I think, your mention of partnerships, I agree with you. I do see that these more substantial partnerships, not just the selling partnerships, because recognizing that, and I know, here at Skooks, we've got some of these, but the idea that, okay, this is what we do really well. And if you're able to do this other thing also, it makes it that much better. Yeah. And an organization on their own could put that together. You can find players and figure out how to do the things. But if a provider has a partner that they work with and they've sort of optimized the way those two things work together, you're in a little bit better position. So I think that, and you're seeing a lot of that. There's sort of partnerships, co-opetition, whatever it is that like, look, you got your chocolate and my peanut butter or whatever it is. And I definitely am seeing a lot more of that. And I think that that's beneficial to the space, to the buying space, as opposed to like a pure environment of acquisitions, which I don't think is necessarily
I totally agree. Yeah.
beneficial. Yeah. So awesome. So listen, I wanted to sort of wrap this up. I think, we've talked a lot about all the different measurement pieces. And to me, again, I think the takeaway is if it is a linear flowchart, measurement's actually at the beginning. I don't think either one of us would agree or would say that it is a line. I think it's a much messier graphic than that. But and measurement appears throughout however you want to plot it out, measurement's everywhere, right? You have to start with something. What am I after? And then did I get there? And then how do I course correct, sort of on a more granular level. I think that's the other thing, right, is that this sort of black and white sort of block approach to measurement causes organizations to overcorrect or overinvest, right? If you're focused on like a couple of key metrics and things work out well, okay, like people love it and they finished it, so let's just dump our money in that program. Yeah, but are they doing anything? It might have just been a simple, fun little course and they didn't really get anything out of it. Or people are struggling with this, let's can it. Maybe they're struggling because they're really having to change the way they think or the way they behave, which is a struggle. So I think to me that's the other thing is you just have got to break out of the very set mindset of this stuff. Any other last thoughts on measurement? Because I want to get into my next thing with you. But what are some of the things you want people to take away from this?
It's a very important endless process. Like I think you said it best. It's not a one and done thing. It's not a report. It is continuously adjusting your metrics based on what the business needs and what the
say continuously rather than endless. I think you might be disheartened to people with endless.
Yeah, maybe that's a little better. A continuous process. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. All right. So this is, we are at prediction time. And so I ask all of my guests to, and well, you being in the analyst space know this very well. I've spent some time in that
Yeah.
space as well. We love to make predictions. People make predictions all the time, and we're recording this at the end of 2023. But this is when people put out all their grand predictions. So what I've noticed is no one ever goes back and looks and sees what happened. So I have three choices for you. We can look at a prediction that was made that should have come true this year, and we can decide whether or not it did, why it didn't. Or we can look at a prediction that was made this year for the next year or two, and we can decide whether or not that is going to happen or not, and why. Or your third option is you can make your very own prediction, and we can talk about that a little bit. Which would you like?
Well, I thought the first one, but can I change it to the second one?
The second one, something that was made now
That's
that is
going
going
to
to
happen in the
happen.
next couple of years. Yeah.
Okay.
Can
So
we do
this is
that?
one that I thought would be great for you, that I had it marked
Okay.
before you when you. I had each one marked for what you picked. So this one, and this is luckily getting us off measurement topic. We can talk about something else. But there was a couple of probably more than a couple predictions that learning is going to continue to be increasingly virtual. That was supposed to come, that will come true in the next year or so, like 2024, 2025. I've seen a couple different things. So thinking about where we are now as that is made, and that's going to increasingly occur. What do you think about that?
I don't know. So there are like some factors that come into this, right? So the whole conversation about hybrid work is still well underway. Like it is still a thing, and there's still a huge power struggle between employees and organizations about how much they need to be in the office and all that stuff. So depending on that will definitely affect it. I think technology is increasingly getting better, and so we'll have more opportunities to learn online. It doesn't necessarily have to be like a traditional virtual instructor-led training or cohort learning stuff or e-learning stuff. So we'll see new ways come in as well to sort of enhance that. With the advent of Gen AI, we're already seeing people sort of double down on using technology to do some of this training because of these new capabilities that are available. All of that said, though, there was a huge pushback after the pandemic of people who wanted to get back face to face. And we're still seeing that. People want to go to conferences, they want to be face to face and shake hands and breathe the same air. And all those types of things, because that's where like the need for connection of humans is really strong. And I think we all can understand that from the pandemic. I'm a gigantic introvert, and still I missed people. And so I think we're balancing those two things. So what I think is so the short answer is yes and no. Yes, I think we'll continue to see more virtual stuff, but I think we'll start to see more different kinds of virtual stuff, and learning opportunities will increase. We won't just be forcing more people into e-learning. So I think that's true. But I also think the organization has gained a very important understanding of the importance of connection. So I think we'll continue to invest in those opportunities, but they will have a different purpose. It won't be just for learning; it will be for that connection piece as well. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, my initial reaction to the question itself is that I don't think things will get increasingly virtual. I think we're
Okay.
going to probably continue. It's just everything will change shape, right?
Okay.
Like you were saying, I think is a similar response. But I think you're saying things will just sort of change shape, which is good. That's what I want. Like, again, one of these sort of ancillary outcomes to the pandemic environment is organizations realized, yes, people want to be back. They want to be in person, but also we don't need to dump everything that we do into that one thing. It wasn't the
Yeah.
best way to do it. And we found by force that we could do a lot of other stuff, and it was really
Yeah.
effective. So let's just pull back what we need. And I think that you hit the nail on the head is we'll continue to see in-person stuff whenever possible. A lot of organizations sort of went virtual anyway, so people don't have a place to be. But that creates an even bigger need to get them together when you can. And then, there will be a much higher premium placed on that time, right? If we can get people together in the same place at the same time, let's really do the right thing. Let's just not put them in chairs and talk at them for an hour, 2 hours, whatever it is. Let's really maximize what makes that special. Because I agree with you. People really need that connection. We've had this discussion of introversion before.
Yeah.
And it's like, I was the same way, thinking, I can't wait to get somewhere, so I sit in the corner and not talk to anybody.
Right.
But yeah, you want to be where people are. And I don't think in my lifetime, technology is going to replace that, that feeling that you get of being in person. So yeah, I don't think it'll increase. I think it'll be interesting uses of tools to build on that in-person things, like what happens before, what happens during, what happens after. That kind of thing is exciting. And hey, who knows? Maybe 2024 is virtual reality's year. It's only been about 50 years.
It's only been around for 40 years. I'm sure that this
coming.
is it.
This is the one, right? The metaverse is happening, whether you like it or not. No, when that started, I was definitely like, oh, no, interesting. And I've seen some really cool virtual reality training. Don't get me wrong. Some really effective, not just cool, like solid stuff. But the world at large is not going to be spending their time inside a pair of goggles doing things. So sorry,
Probably
everybody.
not.
So awesome. Well, Dani, thank you so much for taking some time and chatting about this. Measurement's always been big with me because of the reasons we talked about. It's really hard for people to get their heads around and figure out how to do it right. Hopefully they talk to people like you and can learn more about that. And obviously you've actually referenced it a couple times. You guys have done reports on this. You have ones in the works. So really cool research-based studies on this. So I think very helpful to folks. But again, Dani from RedThread, thank you so much.
Thanks for the invitation, David. This was really fun.